You've done the pre-study, powered through live review, and cranked through more practice questions than you can count. Now the exam's just around the corner, and with so much riding on it, you're probably wondering, what should I be focused on right now? In this video, we're going to walk through 13 quick, high-impact tips, 4 general test-taking strategies, plus 9 highly testable, easy-to-learn topics from across the knowledge domains. These topics will not be new concepts, but if any of them are fuzzy, it's worth spending time on because they will show up frequently on the exam. Let's dive in. Tip number 1, this is a reading comprehension test, not a math exam. Now, the CFP exam is much more about reading comprehension than it is about complex calculations, meaning you're more likely to get a question wrong because you misread it than because you mismathed it. Read the actual question being asked. Now, that might sound basic, but question writers love to distract you with all the information you need to solve one kind of problem, but then ask you about something completely different. Another way test takers get distracted? By reading too much into the problem. Stick to the details given. Don't create backstories or make up assumptions about the client's situation beyond what is explicitly there. Don't assume that college is $40,000 or that passive investing is the best strategy. Remember, the CFP exam is not about your firm's preferences or point of view. It's about what the board thinks is most right. Lastly, don't forget to look for phrases like what's not correct or which of the following is false. Again, you'd be surprised at how your brain jumps to conclusions when it's under time pressure. Tip number 2, get your calculator ready. Now, it's not like the exam has zero math. Most of it is arithmetic, but you will come across a few time value of money questions. In that case, you're going to want your calculator ready, and you're going to want to make sure that they don't confiscate it during check-in. Before you walk into the testing center, make sure that you know how to completely clear your calculator's memory. Google the exact steps for your specific model. Also know how to set your calculator's preferences back afterwards. For example, how to display 4 decimal places. And if you're using an HP 12C or some other calculators, cover up the equation references on the back. Take it out if you can, or use duct tape. You don't want the test center to stop you from taking your calculator into the testing area. Tip number 3, master the art of elimination. Now, you've probably heard some people say that the CFP exam is more subjective than other exams like the Series 7 or 65. While those exams are more definition and fact-based, the CFP exam has a good number of, what's the best course of action questions. If you're looking at a question and you do not know the right answer, try to eliminate your way to the right answer. Strike out obviously incorrect statements, look for extreme language like always or never. Is it really the case that absolutes apply? It's possible, but rare. You may also see 2 answers that essentially say the same thing, therefore they must both be wrong. Now, even if you're only able to strike it down to 2 possible answers, you've now given yourself a much better shot of randomly picking the correct one. Now, on the flip side, if you find yourself saying, wow, but all of these look right, look for the one that's most correct. As a simple rule of thumb, for definitional questions, choose the broader, more comprehensive answer, and for advice questions, go with the more specific, actionable response. Tip number 4, use strategic question management. Invariably on the exam, you will hit a question or 2 where you are completely stumped. Don't panic and don't waste precious time. Pick a random answer, rank the question review, and move on. Remember, there is no penalty for wrong answers, so you should answer every single question. If you're torn between 2 possible choices, pick one, but jot down the question number, and your reasoning on your scratch paper. These will be your priority questions when you go revisit them when you have time at the end. Now, the key here is maintaining momentum. Don't let one tough question derail your entire exam experience. As Ted Lasso said,
be a goldfish, Sam. Yeah.
10-second memory. Once you answer a question, move on. And now that we've covered the strategic foundations, let's dive into some highly testable content that can make the difference between passing and failing. Tip number 5, education coordination rules. Education tax benefits are a favorite exam topic because the coordination rules, they're specific and they're easy to test. Think about it like filling 4 different buckets with education expenses: American Opportunity Tax Credit, Lifetime Learning Credit, 529, and Coverdell. You can't use the same dollar of expense to fill multiple buckets in the same year. No double dipping. Each bucket is going to have its own eligibility rules for what expenses qualify. For the American Opportunity and Lifetime Learning Credits, these are the most restrictive. They only cover tuition and fees and required material like books and supplies. That's it. No room and board, no transportation, no personal expenses. 529 plans have a much broader eligibility. They cover the same expenses as the tax credits, plus they also cover room and board if the student is enrolled at least half-time, computers and internet access, and even special needs services. Covered Ls are the broadest. They cover everything the other buckets do, plus K through 12 expenses. Now, here's how this is going to get tested. In an easy question, they might ask you how a family can fund college tuition. If there is no dollar amount given, assume nothing. Don't assume that there's enough tuition dollars to fill the buckets. Instead, select the option where only one of these coordinated tax advantage sources show up. Remember, things like gifts, loans, UTNAs, savings, normal savings, those can be used in conjunction with their buckets because there is no tax advantage to coordinate. In a hard question, you might be given tuition and room amounts plus an income figure. Remember, phase outs for the tax credits, they will appear on the exam's tax tables. Fill the buckets one by one until you run out of expenses, paying attention if the expense qualifies. All right, we're almost halfway through these tips. If you're still here, take a second and hit the like button. It helps more people find this new channel. And if you've got a friend or a colleague who's thinking about taking the CFP exam next cycle, share this channel with them. I really appreciate it. Tip number 6, IRA distribution ordering. Yet another bucket system. All right, so while we're talking about buckets of money and taxes, let's talk about Roth IRA distributions. Once again, you're gonna wanna think about this in buckets or chunks of money. This time we've got 3 distinct buckets that empty in specific order. Bucket number 1 is contributions. These come out first and are always tax-free and penalty-free, regardless of your age or how long the account has been open. You have already paid taxes on this money going into the Roth, so it's yours to take out anytime. Bucket number 2 is conversions. These come out second. They're tax-free because you pay taxes when you converted to a Roth, but here's the catch. If you're under 59.5, you pay a 10% early withdrawal penalty unless the conversion has been in the account for at least 5 years, and each conversion has its own 5-year clock. Bucket number 3 is earnings. These come out last. If you are under 59.5 and the account has been open for 5 years, you pay both income taxes and the 10% penalty on earnings. There are exceptions, such as if you're disabled or you're using the funds for a first home purchase. Those are facts to memorize on a flashcard. Now, here's how this gets tested. They will give you a scenario. For example, Sarah, age 45, has a Roth IRA with $20,000 in contributions, $15,000 in conversions from 3 years ago, and $8,000 in earnings. She withdraws $25,000. What are the tax consequences? For this, $20,000 comes from contributions, tax-free, penalty-free, and the remaining $5,000 comes from conversions. It's income tax-free because she's already paid for it, but it is subject to the penalty because she's withdrawing it early and before the 5-year rule. No earnings were touched, so no taxes on those. Remember, contributions first, conversions second, earnings last. Buckets empty in order. Now let's shift gears to do some professional conduct essentials that are easy points once you know the specific rules. Tip number 7, master client confidentiality rules. Professional conduct questions love to test your understanding of client confidentiality. This is a key real-life application of the code and standards. Now, in general, you must keep confidential and not disclose any non-public personal information about any client. So that's prospects, current clients, or former clients. That's pretty straightforward. But here's how it gets testable. There are 3 general exceptions where you can share client information. First is when the client gives you express permission to do so. Second is in the normal course of business. Think sharing information with others at your firm or with your CPA, attorney, or auditor. And third, for legal and enforcement purposes. This includes things like civil, criminal, and regulatory investigations. Pay attention to scenario questions that test these boundaries. They love to give you situations where disclosures seem reasonable, but don't fall into these exceptions. Say, like when you're discussing a situation with a client's adult child or with their estate attorney. Remember, you need the client's express permission. Tip number 8, know how to use the CFP marks. While we're in professional conduct, there's another area that tests regularly. The CFP mark usage questions show up frequently, and they are easy points, again, if you know the rules. The board has a simple website that lays these out. In general, the rules you want to keep in mind are always use capital letters, never lowercase, never put periods between CFP, always use the registered trademark symbol, and you always have to use one of the approved nouns directly after CFP, unless it's following a certificate's name on the same line. Now, here's a big one. You cannot use both marks with one in parentheses. So John Doe is a certified financial planner, parentheses CFP. Professional is wrong. Use one or the other. And finally, certificates are strictly prohibited from using CFP marks in domain names, URLs, or email addresses. So no johndoecfp@gmail.com or jane@cfppro.net. All right, you still hanging in there? I almost made this video 20 tips, but for my sanity and yours, I cut it down to 14. So let's keep going. Tip number 9, never skip steps in the financial planning process. This is one of those concepts that seems obvious, but gets tested in tricky ways. The CFP board's financial planning process has 7 distinct steps. And again, the thing to remember is that you cannot proceed to a later step until you fulfill the other ones, even if your client is practically begging you for advice. So if a client calls you up and says, hey, I just inherited $500,000, should I pay for my mortgage? You can't just jump straight into recommendations. You need to go back, regather information about their financial situation, reassess their goals, potentially revise your entire analysis. The exam loves to test this in scenarios where something major happens in a client's life, like an inheritance, selling a business, getting divorced, job loss. In these situations, you're often going back to step 2 or 3, not moving forward to step 6 or 7. Now, here's another quick tip that's worth knowing since it comes up regularly, but doesn't require deep analysis. Tip number 10, master psychology of financial planning with flashcards. Psychology of financial planning is pretty straightforward compared to other domains. From what I've heard, it's mostly definitional questions. For that reason, you're best served learning this content through flashcards. At 7% of the exam weight, you should expect about 11 or 12 of these questions. Now, I've made a separate video covering 22 key behavioral finance concepts that are most likely to show up. I'll link that in the description. If you are short on time, focus on being able to quickly identify these core concepts rather than trying to memorize hundreds of psychological concepts. All right, now let's dive into some more technical content that's still quick to refresh if you've forgotten it. Tip number 11, bond yield curves. Know when to go short and when to go long. Bond yield curve questions come up regularly, and once you understand the logic, they're pretty easy. There are 2 main scenarios you need to recognize. Normal yield curves have a positive slope. So as time increases, interest rates increase to account for the higher risk of the longer time horizon. This is what you would expect to see most of the time in a stable economy. Inverted yield curves have negative slopes. The short-term rate is actually higher than the long-term rate. This happens when short-term rates suddenly spike up, often as a harbinger of economic trouble. Now, the key insight for the exam is that your investment strategy depends on where the yield curve is headed, not just on what it looks like today. So when shifting from normal to inverted curve, well, rates are rising quickly. So your advice to clients is to stay short. Keep your money liquid and wait for rates to continue rising before locking in anything long-term. When the curve is inverted and starting to normalize, that means rates are falling from their peak. Now is when you want to lock in those elevated rates for as long as possible. Go with the longest duration bonds, even if the rate is slightly lower than midterm options. Again, you're trying to lock in those high rates long before they disappear. Tip number 12, master the 2-step coinsurance formula. Now, coinsurance calculations show up frequently in the exam, and they follow a specific 2-step formula that's easy to mess up under pressure. So let me break it down for you. In step number 1, calculate the required insurance coverage. This is replacement cost times coinsurance percentage. Step number 2, calculate what the insurance company pays out. This is done by prorating the loss by the amount of required insurance that the client actually has, minus their deductible. Here's what you need to know for the exam. Homeowners policies use 80% coinsurance, while commercial buildings can be 90%, and the exam will tell you which percentage to use. You also need to know that for dwelling coverage, assume replacement cost value, aka the cost to buy the thing again. For personal property, assume actual cash value. That is the replacement value minus depreciation, basically how much cash you would have gotten if you had sold this thing on Facebook Marketplace. So if you lose your house, you're going to get a new house, assuming you've got the required insurance coverage. But if you lose a 10-year-old refrigerator, don't expect your insurance company to pay for a brand new Samsung. And finally, tip number 13, download the exam tax tables. Hopefully you've been referencing these tax tables throughout your study, but if you haven't, stop everything and download them. These will be available to you when you're taking an exam inside the Prometric interface. Spend time getting comfortable with how they're organized so you're not hunting around during the test time. It's 7 pages long and nearly all the tax figures you need are in there. So if you're still nervous about memorizing certain phase outs or contribution limits, there's a good chance they're provided on the table. Just know how to find them fast. And there you have it, 13 high impact tips that can make a real difference on your CFP exam day. This close to the exam, it's all about keeping everything straight in your head. Remember, you don't have to be perfect to pass the exam. Be confident in the work you've done, be strategic in your time management, and get some sleep. If you haven't seen it already, I've got a video walking you through what to expect on exam day, from getting through security, packing lunch, to how to make the most of your 40-minute break. Check it out here. Good luck, and I will see you in the next one.